ties with Russia over the military incursion in Crimea. The Russian foreign minister is still refusing to meet his Ukrainian counterpart in Paris. And here at home, President Obama is being savaged for what critics call a lack of leadership. The president responded today somewhat by equating the Ukraine situation with his quest to raise the minimum wage. Here's Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry.
On the road today in Connecticut, President Obama was campaigning to raise the minimum wage in America when he suddenly took a sharp turn to Ukraine and its popular uprising and suggested America doesn't always match its own democratic ideals.
Whether it's in Central Europe or in the Middle East or Africa, individuals want a chance to make it if they try. And what makes us special is we already do that when we're at our best. But we've got some work to do to match up our ideals with the reality that's happening on the ground right now.
Republicans see a completely different opportunity to keep pounding the message the president looks weak.
Can you think of any place in the world, any place, where we're better off now than we were when he came to office?
Democrats defend the president by saying the U.S. has isolated Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the crisis can be solved diplomatically.
We are the most powerful military on earth. That doesn't mean that we should always have to be the only ones that step up to the plate.
Yet a new Fox poll out tonight shows support for the president's handling of foreign policy has dipped 6 points since December. 33% of the public approve of his handling of foreign policy, 56% disapprove. And Republicans charge part of that is the president misreading Putin's ambitions.
For us to think that they weren't going to try to interfere with the territorial integrity of Ukraine, frankly, I think denies history, and also I just think was a naive view of this.
There was more tension today in Ukraine, protesters waving Russian flags and chanting Russia, Russia, storming a government building and flying a Russian flag from its roof, just hours after the new Ukrainian government had flown its flag there for the first time since Saturday. Meanwhile, a United Nations envoy to Crimea, Robert Seri, was threatened by unknown assailants, some with guns, though the UN says the envoy is okay and headed back to Kiev. Back in Washington, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel sharply defended the president's leadership.
It's a time for all of us to stand with the Ukrainian people in support of their territorial integrity and their sovereignty, and we are doing that.
Republican John McCain ripped Hagel for presenting a new budget with defense cuts amid mounting national security challenges.
And I must say, Mr. Secretary, your timing is exquisite.
Now, beyond Crimea, McCain mentioned stalled Iranian negotiations, conflict in Syria, and the Chinese getting more aggressive in the South China Sea, just as China announces it's increasing its own military spending sharply. Brett?
Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. Ukraine's new prime minister says Crimea must remain part of his country. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is trying to cajole the Russians to play nice, but he appears to have little leverage. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen is traveling with Secretary Kerry in Paris tonight.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Joined by aides inside the ambassador's residence at the Russian embassy in Paris, Secretary of State John Kerry squared off once more against Russia's longtime foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, one of the world's savviest and least charitable diplomats, who in any case had already telegraphed how little the Kremlin will concede in the crisis created by its annexation of Crimea in southeastern Ukraine, home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet.
Some special alert measures have been adopted to control the Black Sea Fleet because, as our president said, we are not going to allow any blood to be spilt. The problem should be solved according to the decisions adopted in the 21 February treaty.
That was Moscow's way of saying that despite last month's bloody clashes in Kiev, which killed scores of protesters and sent Ukraine's pro-Russian president fleeing the capital, Russia still regards Viktor Yanukovych as Ukraine's president. Ukraine's new foreign minister, who traveled to Paris aboard Kerry's plane, disputed that, but sought a way out of the crisis.
And wait out not only about Ukraine, but wait out and future of Russia, how Russia will deal with what Russia did to Ukraine.
An iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe.
The Kerry-Lavrov showdown occurred on the 68th anniversary of Winston Churchill's landmark Iron Curtain speech at Westminster College, which illuminated for a generation the dawn of the Cold War. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin, his nation as rich in energy reserves as weapons, aims to restore Russia to the superpower status it enjoyed in the days of the Soviet Union. Secretary Kerry, who has acknowledged the Russians have legitimate interests to protect in Crimea, again called on Putin to negotiate with Ukraine's new government.
I want to be realistic. This is hard, tough stuff and very serious moment. But I'd rather be where we are today than where we were yesterday.
Even more than that elusive meeting with the Russians, what the Ukrainians really need right now is cash. And that appeared to come in the form of a $15 billion pledge of aid from the European Union, which will take the form of loans, grants, and investments over the next few years. Traveling with the Secretary of State in Paris, James Rosen, Fox News.